Thank you for tuning me in. My name is Loni. I'm a licensed marriage, family, and child therapist and have been a clinician for about 30 years. And these YouTube videos are part of me telling a story of actually the last 20 years of my career that have been a game changer for me, I believe, is the work that I do. I'm going to start off by one of my friends, Wendy, mentioned to me that it may be good if I identify who I'm talking about, because maybe not all of you have been watching the series, so you maybe don't understand who I'm talking about when I talk about Uncle Nick and Uncle Indio. So Uncle Nick was a Kumeyaay native here in San Diego, and when I went to work for the tribe in the year 2000, Uncle Nick started to watch over me while I worked out there and continued to watch over me and be my friend till 2017 when he went on into the spirit world. Uncle Indio was a friend of Uncle Nick's, and he too was brought into my life, and also I would say became one of my dearest colleagues and friends. Indio was more like a brother to me, and he would be my go-to person. Oftentimes if I was feeling stuck, he would give me words of wisdom, which I always appreciated and valued. So these are the two people that I'm going to be talking about as I'm weaving some of these stories into my history. Our last conversation, I was talking about when a young girl had asked for Uncle Indio to come to the treatment center where she was, and she began to talk with him and explaining to him how much she was suffering because they weren't allowing her to have her sacred objects and sage. And Uncle Indio was very sweet, as always, and compassionate, and told her a story of his own history. And if you want to watch the previous video, you can hear that story. But I want to continue on in that scenario because this treatment center that this young native girl was at was in downtown San Diego, and there were a whole variety of human beings in that program. And it was pretty hardcore. And so when Indio was done talking with this young girl, all of the residents, big, tall, small, didn't matter what color, some had teeth, some didn't. It just was, they bombarded Uncle Indio, and they would say, I want to talk to the medicine man, I want to talk to the medicine man. And I looked over at Indio, and he just gently nodded his head. I had to get a tablet, and I had to write names down, and by the time I realized it, there were like 30 people, 30 women that all wanted to talk to Indio. So I had to figure it out mathematically and figure out his time, and basically everyone got about 10 minutes with him. So it was a very long day for him, very long. And I was very, very apologetic at the end of it. Oh, Uncle Indio, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I know that wasn't planned. And he said to me in one of the sweetest ways, which I think is probably a very timely message for us right now as a nation, as a planet. And what he said was, when a baby cries, you don't ask what color the baby is. You pick the baby up. That's pretty powerful, right? And that is something that has stuck with me forever because of the compassion of that man, and not seeing anything other than when you hear a baby cry, you don't ask what color the baby is, you just pick it up. And I think as a nation, we have a lot of picking up and holding one another, that maybe we could all benefit from that story. So that was just another wonderful, wonderful lesson in which he taught me, that has stayed with me throughout my work as a therapist. So last time we also were talking about embracing our suffering, embracing whatever is in front of us. The work of the heart is allowing that manifestation to happen when we can soften around some of those hard edges of our heart. A lot of times when I'm working with a client, I may invite them to take a deep breath. And as they're doing that breath, I will say, notice in your heart what the edges are around. What is it that you're holding on to? And let's see if we can breathe into that area and see if we can soften around those edges and meet those edges with compassion. We're all a work in progress. This isn't about perfection. It's certainly about process. And we will be doing this work until we take our last breath. So learning how to make peace with those struggles that we often have, and whether it's loss, whether it's a job that is no longer serving us, maybe it's a relationship that has reached its expiration date, maybe it's children growing up and moving on. We have lots of experiences, or maybe we have children that are suffering themselves. And these are all part of our life. We all have these life stories, and sometimes, it hurts. It's inside of us, and it's painful. And my experience is, especially with Uncle Nick and Uncle Indio, is to lean into the suffering. Not to be afraid of it, lean into it, which is something that happens when ceremony takes place. You lean into it, you don't resist. So when we have these struggles in our lives that show up, right? Remember, what's in the way is often the way. So to make peace with that part of ourselves, to make peace with the suffering, not to resist it, and to allow it to soften those edges around our heart. Because I am a firm believer that we don't just get through this experience called life unscathed. There's suffering attached to it. I'll share a lyric from a song, and it's something that in my own 66 years on the planet, I have come to embrace, and also my work at hospice. And the lyric goes like this: I walked a mile with pleasure, and she chattered all the way. Never really learned much from her when pleasure had her way. But oh, I walked a mile with sorrow, and never a word said she. But oh, the many things I learned when sorrow walked with me. That's our teacher. That's our teacher. And we live in a culture that wants to deny the suffering. We live in a culture that says, buy me here, move here, marry this person, all of those different things to distract us and to, quote unquote, alleviate our suffering, when actually the suffering of our life is the most amazing teacher. That's what softens up our heart. It's what helps, sort of, relax some of those tough edges around the things that we're holding on to. Because the one thing that Nick used to tell me, and I'll give you an example, he'd say, you know, Loni, you can go through life like this, or you can go through life like this, which was a very beautiful analogy of the letting go. And surrender isn't a passive stance. Surrender takes courage. It takes courage to not allow things to get attached and anchor inside your heart and become bitter. It takes courage to continue to invite love in, because love is the only thing that is going to unite us humans. That we can sort of relax around those hard edges of our own heart of differences and relax into that and allow love to flourish. My new mantra in today's day of COVID and unrest, with America having to wake up, and my mantra is this: I want to seek to understand. I want to seek to understand. So tell me more. Tell me more. I want to be a student, and I want to hear, and I want to listen with my heart and not be afraid of what is being shared. And sometimes that means having to really listen and allow ourselves to feel the suffering of others, but also allow ourselves to feel our own suffering. I'll tell you another story. I was at a workshop in New Mexico during 3 days before 9/11. And the workshop was Healing Historical Trauma of Indigenous Peoples. And there were people from all different tribes, all different cultures. And this conversation was 4 days, and it was powerful, it was heavy, it was hard to hear about colonization and the impact that it's had on the planet. And there were times that, you know, the shame that I would feel would just almost overtake me. And there was an elder, his name was Virgil Killstraight, and there was about 400 of us in the auditorium, and there were some pretty heavy hitters there as far as speakers. Bessel van der Kolk was one of them. He's a Harvard psychiatrist, brilliant man. But having to really hear about what happens when trauma is just ongoing for generations. 500 years, 400 years. It's been a long, long, long time. So Virgil Killstraight, he brought his abalone shell with sage, and he said, this has been a difficult day to hear these kinds of truths. And this gentle man walked up and down each row and prayed for each and every one of us. And to feel the love and the compassion after hearing such travesties that have occurred, I was in awe. And again, my heart got to soften. My heart got to break open. I got to walk with sorrow. Never a word said she, but oh, the many things I learned when sorrow walked with me. So there are many, many stories that I could share with you about my journey of embracing suffering. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong. Basically, what I'm saying is it needs to happen so my heart can be enlarged. So I would invite you to think about it. And I want to say thank you for stopping by and listening to this. And we'll just continue on with this conversation. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.